Captain Cook, he was this incredible cartographer, just headed towards Alaska now, across the Great Pacific. And they go to New Zealand, a less good experience there that involves cannibalism. And in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he stumbles on this incredible archipelago, Hawaii.
Welcome back to the Backcountry Manifesto podcast. I'm your buddy out west, Hayden Samak, and today on the show, we are talking all things exploration and Captain Cook with author Hampton Sides, author of The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the fateful final voyage of Captain James Cook. Dude, thank you for coming and hanging out all the way in Bozeman, Montana, dude.
It is good to be here on a snowy morning in your amazing man cave here.
Yeah, we tried our best to decorate it in such a way that was stimulating and fun. It feels nice on days like this too.
It really does. It does.
We're actually gonna have like 2 episodes, or maybe a 2-part episode. We're gonna talk about 2 of your books. The first being your recent book, The Wide, Wide Sea. You write a lot about exploration. I would love to know how you pick your subjects and what brought you to the Wide, Wide Sea. What brought you to this tale? Why do you think that had to be explored, no pun intended, like more than it already had been?
Well, Captain Cook is somebody that has come up in my travels and in my research for magazine pieces, for some of my previous books. I've been aware of him for a long time. He is arguably the greatest nautical explorer of all time. And I think almost by any metric you want to come up with, he belongs at least in the pantheon of the great nautical explorers, and for all kinds of reasons. But I never imagined that I would write about him because I'm an American writer with an American readership, primarily American publisher.
You note that in your preface.
Yeah. But then I started to realize in looking at his 3 voyages that the third voyage, a lot of the action happens in the present day United States. A lot of it happens in Alaska, off the coast of Oregon, Washington, and of course, a big part and the most dramatic part of the story takes place in Hawaii. It also happened in July of 1776. It's when they left Plymouth, England.
That's a pretty good American tie.
With a bunch of American-born sailors on board. And they leave Plymouth without getting the memo about this little thing that happened in Philadelphia. And so for the 4 years that they are going around the world, they don't really know what's happening in the colonies on the east coast of the North American continent, but they are going to Alaska, the west coast, northwest coast of that same continent. And so they're sort of blissfully ignorant of all these developments in the colonies. And then the captain that has to bring the ships home, because newsflash, Captain Cook dies and doesn't make it home. And we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But is a guy, Captain John Gore, who was born and raised in Virginia. So he's an American. And so I started to realize this is an American story just as much as it is a British story. And maybe there's a way to crack open and crack into this monumental story of Captain Cook by picking one voyage, this one final voyage, to understand him. And I'm not a biographer. Biographies tend to often be like doorstops. They're usually like 1,000 pages, cradle to grave. You got to tell.
We were talking about that earlier.
Something happens. You invest a certain amount of time as a biographer. Then you're just like, holy damn! I'm going to make this the definitive biography, and that means usually that it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted to make. I wanted to write. A book where the voyage was the main character. How like a road trip or any great trip that you go on, it has its own kind of beginning, middle, end arc, and story arc to it, and mood, and highs and lows and twists and turns, and that. And a Voyage narrative also has this built-in structure that's just so simple. It's like they go out, they come back. At least some come back.
Yeah.
So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time stewing over how to structure the thing, or, like, do I have flashbacks, or do I, it's like, no, you just tell the story of the voyage. And you don't necessarily hit every stop. You don't necessarily give every island that he visited equal weight, but you follow the chronology of the voyage, and that certainly made things simpler. The other part of how I came to the story is kind of facetious, but it's actually true. Okay. And that is that I've done a bunch of these books now, and a lot of them have involved travel to some pretty far removed places that aren't necessarily pleasant. In Siberia and remote parts of the Philippines and North Korea. And, it's like my wife said to me, done all this travel for all these books. Why don't you pick a story that involves some travel to some places that, like, I'd like to go to, like Bora Bora. Yeah. No, she didn't say that. She said just somewhere nice, and we had empty nest at that point. My wife herself is a very adventurous traveler and a very, very important part of my whole process, by the way. She's a former producer and editor at National Public Radio. She's my first reader, she's not just someone who wants to go on a pleasure cruise, but she just did say, like, pick a book, you have some level of control over what you write about. And I said, all right, well, let me get back to you. And like 3 days later, I said, how about Captain Cook? And she's like, well, where did he go? And I said, well,
the Cook Islands?
Tahiti, Cook Islands, New Zealand, Easter Island, of course, the Hawaiian Islands, and on it goes. And she liked the sound of that. But then I was like, but I can't write about all three of his voyages. That's like, they go out, they come back. They go back out, they come back. They go back out. It's like that doesn't. That's not a satisfying, and also somewhat repetitive structure too.
There are a lot of books that deal in these like multifaceted like periods of exploration, and a lot of them involve the same characters.
Right.
It's not so much even that it could just be a lot to keep track of, because you start like conflating events, particularly if they're going for, trying to find the Northwest Passage, or like, a lot of like the early, and we're going to talk about this later, but a lot of like the early polar expeditions, or like, we'll talk about the negative discovery in a little while. But as a reader, I have trouble kind of keeping track in those things. So I don't know. I appreciate that concern.
Well, I mean, it gets complicated in a hurry. And of course I made the decision to write about the third voyage, but I do multiple times have to go back and explain things that happen on voyage 1 or 2, because they have an impact on the third voyage. So I did have to become a student really of all three of his voyages, and they were all monumental undertakings that involved hundreds of men and just hundreds of thousands of nautical miles and discoveries of places and species and descriptions of things that, really expanded our knowledge of the world. They're also controversial because they also involved, sort of bringing modernity to a lot of island cultures that subsequently unraveled because of all these things that Cook sort of brought them. So I did have to sort of master a body of literature and a body of knowledge that went far beyond just the third voyage. There's just so much stuff out there about Captain Cook. It's daunting almost. The there's a society. It's called the Captain Cook Society, which I joined. We call ourselves the Cookies.
That's
and
funny. I like that.
they're all over the world. They're anthropologists, they're marine archaeologists, marine historians, geeks who collect stamps and coins and artifacts, maps. They're everywhere, and they know. But if you add up all the knowledge that they have. I mean, I couldn't have done this book without them. Honestly, they launched the book for me and got me, disabusing me of a lot of wrong ideas, and it's like, thank God for those people. But I just mentioned this because to say there is this Captain Cook is sort of like it's like the Civil War or something. Like it's this massive subject that has this massive body of literature surrounding it, and this. Not terribly large, but very dedicated subculture of people who know all about it, and not just necessarily Cook, but that whole kind of golden age of exploration. So it's both a blessing and a curse. Yeah. And, I don't want to piss those people off. I didn't want to make a mistake that would be embarrassing.
Get some real angry emails.
Occasionally. It did occasionally happen. But anyway, that's sort of how I got into it. I am interested in exploration. I am fascinated by that period of history when there were still these large puzzles of the planet to solve, like places that we humans had not been to before, or at least in some cases, Western people had not been to. And Cook is a giant in that realm, and will always be, despite the fact that he's become controversial in recent years. He will kind of always be in that kind of upper echelon of, along with Magellan and, a handful of others. He's one of the greats.
Sure. In that preface that I mentioned earlier, I guess going back to that, you do acknowledge, or the preface to your book is actually really interesting to me, because you kind of tackle what you said in so many words, I guess, just then, the kind of nature, like, hey, look, this guy was of his time. He did these good things. He also did these not so good things. I'm just going to tell you what I know and what has been found out. And I'm not really going to attach an agenda to it that's supposed to be like, and the moral of the story is, it's like, these are things that happened, you decide. One of the other interesting things that kind of happens is right from the outset, there's like a very sympathetic, I guess, description of Captain Cook. Like when I was reading that first part, I was like, this dude sounds great. Everything like checks out. He's like reserved. He lives what I would assume would be way under his means. I kind of have the idea that a lot of these explorers back in this era were like the rock stars. Like these were like the big people doing like the things. These were the people that were like universally like loved and lauded by the communities from which they had, departed and returned to. Can you like just for our, listeners who have not read, can you describe sort of what Captain Cook, tell me about Captain Cook, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I will say for sure that I came to really admire many, many, many aspects of his personality. I mean, starting with the fact that he came from nothing. I mean, he worked his way up through the Royal Navy, coming from poverty. He grew up on a farm. His father rose to becoming a farm manager of an estate. He looked around as a kid and it's like, this is bullshit. I don't want to, be a farmer. And he lived about 15 miles from the sea. And so he decided to move to this place called Whitby, where he became an apprentice to a Quaker shipping concern that built ships and transported coal from Newcastle down to London, but also these ships went all over the Baltic and the North Sea. And so he became a merchant mariner, worked his way up through the merchant marine, and it was self-educated. And then at a certain point, when he had reached the pinnacle in the merchant marine, became a captain, he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be in the Royal Navy. So he had to go all the way back down to able-bodied seamen and then work his way back up to being a captain. And he did all this really fairly quickly because they understood very early on that he had unbelievable skills as a mathematician, as an astronomer, and as someone who could make maps, really accurate maps. Yeah. It really, of all his skills that he developed over the course of his career, that's the one that it was like off the charts. He was this incredible cartographer on the fly too, often, like having to sort of do this with trigonometry, dead reckoning, kind of just looking around, sketching coastlines, at a time when there weren't great maps, so therefore the maps that did exist were extremely important, extremely valuable, and noting also, of course, depths and the rocks and any kind of impediments that could be dangerous. And so the Royal Navy really, like, this guy's kind of a genius. Let's snap him up. And so then he goes on to, during the what we call the French and Indian War, but the Europeans call the 7 Years' War. He fought in Canada against, they were fighting the French, and he was given this assignment to essentially chart the entirety of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the St. Lawrence River all the way up to Quebec City. And these charts were so good, and they probably saved a lot of lives, noting where the shoals were and the rocks were, and where there was also like mines and all kinds of things. The French had mined the harbors and stuff like this. So on the basis of that, they then decide, man, he's so good. Let's have him map our new the English kicked ass and beat the French. So now they have all these new possessions to themselves. And one of them is Newfoundland, which is one of the most complicated coastlines in the world, because it's just so glaciated. So he spends 3 summer seasons mapping Newfoundland. And there's a British documentary that shows his map of using the crude tools of his day with a satellite map of Newfoundland. They kind of superimpose it, and it's chillingly accurate. It's just like, well, he nailed it, like perfectly. All the the topography. So now is like they realize we got a genius here. This guy's truly a genius, and along the way, he had learned to be a really amazing captain too, in terms of like shipboard economy, how to, command a group of men in very dangerous conditions. Sure. And he had this sixth sense about storms, and would often, like, he wouldn't even come out on the decks. You wouldn't see him. And then finally he would just come in right at in the nick of time to change the course of the ship to avoid rocks or something. It was like how did he know? His crew would often be like, wow, he must have like some kind of spooky sixth sense for this thing. So for all these reasons, the Royal Navy and the Admiralty in London, they say, he's our great commander. So so they gave him this assignment, voyage number 1, which was to go do some astronomy work in Tahiti. They were trying to witness something called the transit of Venus, which is a complicated thing, but it was this kind of world experiment to observe this event from multiple locations. And the theory was somewhat true. It was somewhat true, but if these calculations would tell us the distance between the Earth and the sun. Don't ask me how. I'm not an astronomer myself, but anyway, so they sent him down there to do that. But while he was down there, they said, we also want you to look for this mythic supercontinent that we believe exists down there. It's massive place about the size of Eurasia that supposedly had 12 million people living on it. And, there was all these theories about this.
I love some of the errands that they sent these explorers on. They were like, okay, well, there's this thing down there. And, you know, as we'll talk about with the other expedition, a lot of that's just like not true. What did they call that?
Terra incognita, Terra Australis incognita was what it was shown on the maps. And, it was a fiction, obviously. And there is Antarctica. We subsequently learned there is Australia. This thing was supposed to be like 12 times the combined size of those two continents. And it was supposed to be populated with people. How these various pseudoscientists came up with these theories is a story unto itself. But you mentioned earlier something about negative discovery. Right. And this is what Cook becomes famous for, is like he goes down there without any preconceived notions. He's just like, I'm going to see what's down there. Screw the maps. I'm going to make my own map. And he doesn't find it. He doesn't find it. He finds the east coast of Australia, and he maps that, and he meets the Aboriginal people of all along the east coast of Australia. He goes to New Zealand, a place that was vaguely known to exist because of a guy named Abel Tasman 200 years earlier, and more than 100 years earlier. And he goes and maps the entire, both the North and the South Island of New Zealand, and has these incredible encounters with the Maori people. So he comes back to England, and he becomes, as you say, kind of like a rock star or an astronaut kind of. It's like he's returned with all this knowledge. Oh yeah, he dashed the hopes of a lot of these pseudoscientists who believed in the supercontinent, but look what he came back with, all this knowledge about all these different peoples. He had a famous scientist on board that first voyage who is a botanist. Banks, Joseph Banks is his name. Nothing to do with the
infamy.
Nothing to do with the suit, the cut rate suits you get at the malls. This is a famous member of the Royal Society who went on to become the president of that society. And so Cook is studying this guy, Joseph Banks, because Cook has himself no training as an anthropologist or a scientist. He's a savvy captain and a brilliant map maker, but he's not a scientist. But so in subsequent voyages, Cook becomes the scientist and sort of mimics the style of Joseph Banks, and really becomes, without any formal training, a kind of a ethnographer, describer of a biologist, a botanist, a collector of species, all of this is happening sort of in the waning days of the Enlightenment, when people were trying to categorize knowledge and spread knowledge around the world, and publish this stuff. And so that is kind of the context of all three of Cook's voyages, is that with a few exceptions, certain finds that the Admiralty didn't want to publish for geopolitical or strategic reasons, by and large, they published everything. And so you get these beautiful engravings of species, first description of a kangaroo, a first description of like the haka dance or the hula dance, or, tattooing, just so many things that you've got a few tattoos there. I say, you owe all of this to Captain Cook's voyages and their initial descriptions of tattooing, which they brought back to England, and became this thing that, if you're a sailor, you got to get a tattoo.
Right.
And it kind of went viral, and that's to this day still true. Sailors are supposed to get their tattoos. So that's what's so cool about Cook's voyages, I think, is that the wealth of information that came out of them in these huge volumes that were published around the world in multiple languages, it was an explosion of information, all from this fairly modest guy who came from nothing, who trained himself for the most part, and who led these 3 giant voyages around the world.
I think one of the things that I'm gleaning from your description of Captain Cook is this is a dude who had a gift for evenness, like both as a leader of men and as somebody interpreting the world around him, and an equal gift for really concise documentation. Whether that was, taking things that he saw and translating them into like a mathematical sense in the way that a cartographer does, like using the triangulation of points to like draw that coastline and document that coastline. And also on that more humanitarian sort of, plane, like in the biological documentation and the anthropological documentation and all these things. And in his personal life, I mean, he really had a crazy amount of evenness there too, almost to like I was kind of like envisioning this dude as like a ginger version of Spock a little bit, very much stoic. Like I think stoic would be maybe the term.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Star Trek. So, the creator of Star Trek deliberately patterned much of that sort of his understanding of the Enterprise was based on Captain Cook's first voyage, the Endeavor.
Right.
And Captain James Cook, boldly going where no man has gone before is direct paraphrase of something Cook wrote. He said he wanted to go farther than any man before me, and so there's a lot of resonance between what you see in Star Trek and what was going on in Cook's voyages. And people say, well, they patterned him directly after James Cook, but I mean that Kirk was patterned after Cook. But funny that you mention Spock, because I do think, in some ways he's really more like Spock.
His wife is calling him Mr. Cook. The dude's like eating like just gruel basically is what he's into.
Yeah, and he's super rational, and I don't know if he can do this, but I think he can. He's a little distant, aloof. He doesn't show emotion hardly ever on his first 2 voyages. Third voyage is a little different. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
He is almost like on the spectrum or something, just mathematical, precise, scientific, and really distrusts emotion, and he doesn't like dramatics in the style of his officers or in his own dealings with situations. Very, very, very much like that. And again, back to negative discovery. So he doesn't find this thing that was widely presumed to be there. So that's why they call it negative discovery. Mm-hmm. It's like he's just telling you the facts, like we didn't find it. Yeah. It's not there.
He's just divorced from it. He's like, I'm not very disappointed about it. He's just like, it's just
no, but there's all this amazing other stuff we did find. And here's the proof, and here's what it looks like. And here's, in fact, a lot of artifacts that they brought back to show. And so again, it's sort of a little bit like Spock. Yeah. It's a kind of a more interesting analogy, I think.
Does he view the things that he does discover with an equal sense of detachment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of his biographers said that he had no gift for rhapsody, He didn't go off, talking about, in lyrical language about things he discovered, even though many of the things he discovered were like some of the most beautiful places on earth.
Sure.
With most beautiful. He had this uncanny propensity for anchoring in amazingly beautiful places. Thank you very much, Captain Cook, because I had to go to those places as a researcher. But he didn't talk about them like they're beautiful places. He describes like the depth of the water, the viscosity of the mud at the bottom of the sea, like the barometric pressure, it's like just the data.
They're just very dimensional.
Yeah. And that kind of scientific, if you want to say Spock-like mentality permeates like every aspect of how he ran his voyages. Like, for example, diet. The big thing in long voyages up to Cook was that easily half the sailors would die of scurvy, deficiency of vitamin C. No one really understood what caused it. He didn't really understand it either, but he was scientific about it and decided that it had something to do with fresh food, eating fresh food, and fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, even fresh meat. But fresh food as opposed to the salt pork and the hardtack biscuits that they were giving them.
Pemmican.
So he made them do it. He made them, even against their will sometimes, eat your broccoli, essentially. And consequently, his 3 voyages around the world, which, they were 3 and 4 years in length, in duration, not a single man died of scurvy. Not a single man died of scurvy. And so they thought he had conquered scurvy. He hadn't exactly conquered it, but something in his regimen and their insistence upon fresh food meant that that his men didn't die. And he was very scientific about documenting what he did serve them and what they did eat. And, so it's that kind of mentality, that kind of scientific approach went into just about everything he did.
He was also like embracing a lot of really cutting edge technologies at the time, whether it was the chronometer. Is that what it is? Mm-hmm. I wanted to call it a chronograph for a second, but that's what you
Marine chronometer, right?
Yeah. Or like, his embracing of germ theory, which at the time was like just starting to. What do you think? Because it almost seems like newfangled and practicality are at odds with each other sometimes. He seems both very practical, but also way embracing of these new things that are happening all the time.
Yeah. He had nothing to do with the design or, the manufacture of the chronometer, but he was the first. This is just kind of his good luck. He happened to come along on his second voyage at the point where they were really testing out a chronometer that they thought would work. I mean, this was 20, 30 years of, it started with this Scottish clockmaker who figured out how to design a sea clock that would withstand all the changes in pressure and changes in moisture levels and deal with the salt air and the salt water and the thunks and thumps of a long voyage.
Are we basically talking about a fancy ass clock?
Yeah, basically a fancy ass clock that took decades to make. And I won't go into all the thinking behind it, but so longitude had been for such a long time the sort of the bane of navigators' existence. Like they'd figured out latitude from simple calculations of looking at the moon and the stars and the sun. They knew where they could calculate latitude. Longitude, much more complicated. The idea was if you had a kind of a reference location somewhere in the world, and they decided it would be Greenwich, England, which is where the Royal Observatory was located.
That's how we get Greenwich Mean Time.
That's how we get Greenwich Mean Time to this day. It's one of the most fascinating places in the world to go to. Is the Royal Observatory and also the Maritime Museum, which is right there in Greenwich. Anyway, that was the reference location. And then at noon, anywhere you are in the world, you look at this clock And then you are able to make some very rudimentary calculations and determine longitude. Once you have longitude, you already have latitude. You have this magical thing called, the coordinates. And what that means is, to us today, that doesn't sound like much because we have GPS and we have all these other things. But this was amazing because now they knew where they were in the world fairly easily. And that meant the maps that they were able to make were accurate. That meant that when they got to a port, they could say exactly where that port was. That meant that, in the old days, a lot of times these people would, quote unquote, discover a place. Yeah. They go back to England or go back to the Netherlands or wherever they came from. And they say, well, I don't know where that place is. I think it's like 2 months south and 3 months east, and you'd probably find it.
Yeah.
Now we know exactly where we are. And that changes the game completely. And the marine chronometer, you can see these chronometers on display in the museum in Greenwich. They're about the size of a oyster shell or something. You hold them in your hand. Well, all you got to do is wind them every single day and keep them out of harm's way and keep them in a safe place. Cook was just he was like the beneficiary of this amazing tool and proved on a long voyage that they worked. And when they got back to England, it was off by after 4 years at sea, it was off by 3 minutes. It was wild. So incredibly accurate. So
also though, I'm interested in kind of dovetailing into the scurvy thing with the diet. He had really, really strict ideas about hygiene and how to keep the boat and germ theory. Did he attribute the scurvy thing exclusively to the diet, or did he think it also might be some of those things, like smoking out the inside of his boat, or the vinegar scrubbings that he kind of maintained?
I don't know exactly what he thought. He was kind of like, let's try everything. And definitely, men who had served under other captains noted that serving under this guy, Cook, man, it's different, man. We're scrubbing the decks all the time, and we're smoking out the interior of the ship with it. I don't know that really helped that much, but supposedly it cut down on mold and mildew.
Probably smelled nice.
Yeah. And then there was, his warfare against weevils and cockroaches and rats. I mean, he's constantly devising ways to get rid of them. Almost none of which actually work. There's but one thing they did do is whenever they got to an island, they would create these little bridges for the rats to leave the ship and go to that island. And when we talk about invasive species, these islands in Polynesia are still dealing with
he just seeded them with rats.
The Norwegian rat, the worst, most invasive of all invasive species. They eat all the birds. They, eat everything. They're voracious, and they're still fighting that battle. Thanks, Captain Cook. Much appreciated. But overall, it was sort of scientific approach. Yeah. And keeping the galley clean, using vinegar on just everything. He didn't call it germ theory, but he seemed to understand that dirt and grime was the source of many illnesses that these sailors were getting. And, and he was right. Put it all together. And, it's interesting. Very few people on these 3 voyages died of any of the typical maladies that were killing so many sailors. There was an outbreak of malaria on the first voyage. There was dysentery. There was some things, but it's like scurvy. Not a single person died of it, and that's a major breakthrough.
It seemed like one of the main things that he was good at was he worked in a preventative way a lot. If there were mistakes to be made, and I think that this probably informs some of his dedication to map making. He was like, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And to that extent, he has this personality where you can tell he's just trying to hedge every single bet. to move towards an ultimate goal, which I think is like a large part of his eventual success.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about his eventual success. We're here to talk about his most like profound kind of failure, not like failure, but like, I mean, cataclysmic expedition, which is the third expedition. He'd gone on expedition 1, expedition 2. Things worked out pretty good. Obviously an amazing leader of men, so much so that you point out that even some men that had been reprimanded viciously in previous expeditions signed on to accompany him on this third expedition, or folks that surely had a more guaranteed route towards upward mobility with a lot of these new military operations that were happening as they tried to get control over the colonies. They said, well, I could go that way and, bolster rank, but I'm going to go with Captain Cook.
He engendered, complete loyalty. People were a little bit scared of him. He was a formidable and, big, just, I didn't even talk about his stature. I mean, he was 6'3" or possibly even 6'4", back then. That was really, I mean, he's just a big, tough dude from Yorkshire, a man of very few words. He had a violent temper when needed, but he never cursed.
Really?
He never cursed. He almost never drank in those two areas. He didn't seem like a typical sailor. He was someone, however, that, I'll serve under that guy. He'll get us home. There's a good chance we'll get home. And not only that, but by the time for the third voyage to leave, everyone understood this. Something big is going to happen. This is going to be a famous voyage. Everyone's taking notes, keeping journals. Like, maybe I'll publish a book one day. It's like,
this is Jimi Hendrix writing Electric Ladyland. This is like, people are like, I want to be involved in this project.
Yeah. Something interesting is going to go down. And furthermore, one of the stops on the voyage is going to be Tahiti. I noticed you're wearing Bora Bora hat, but one of the other islands in that chain, that's the Society Islands, of course, is Tahiti, and one of Cook's favorite stopping places. And by this point, it was famous for prior voyages, both English and French, where, it's like beautiful weather, it's beautiful landscapes, beautiful women who seemed to be quite willing, which that's something the sailors didn't understand why they were willing, or I still don't fully understand it.
They sure like to write about it.
Yeah. And there, a lot of them signed on for the voyage, and not just because they thought Captain Cook was great or whatever. They wanted to just find out whether the rumors were true about Tahiti.
That's so funny.
And for the most part, they were not disappointed.
Yeah.
So that's another part of, like, my book is, I don't go into the sex, but there was a lot of sex, and these men can't believe it. They're like,
this is the best voyage ever.
I'm the stinkiest, smelliest, hairiest dude, who's been on this voyage for months. And why are they coming out, swimming out to us to please have sex with me, kind of thing. And that's a whole nother question, is like, why did that happen? It's a complicated question. But in some cases they were doing it because they wanted metal. They would steal nails from the ship. It was to such an extent that Captain Cook becomes worried that the ship's going to fall apart. Okay. So many of the nails are prized loose from the hull of the ship. In other cases, they were told by someone on shore, probably a chief or a priest, to go find out what you can about these men and, find out what powers they have, that sort of thing. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of sex in the book, and my editor kept telling me to take it out, and my wife kept saying, no, put it back in. Anyway, that's a whole nother part of it. But your original question was like, what is it about these guys signing up for yet another voyage with Captain Cook? Part of it is that they really did grow to respect him. And not only that, though, they became, this is something weird. the ship conditions, even on Captain Cook's ships, which were well run, it was horrible. I mean, it was dark and dank and mildewy, and they're swinging in these really confined spaces in their hammocks. Like it's hygiene is not great. It's dangerous. They could capsize at any moment. There's storms, and as soon as they get back from one of these voyages, the first thing they want to do is sign up for another one. It's like they become creatures of the sea. They grow to love, or at least know the familiar rhythms of nautical life, and they're lost when they get on shore. It's like, so they want us to sign up for another one. And I think you can't ignore the other aspect of it, which is that there's a possibility they're going to find something really amazing. And that element of pure discovery is there. It's so much more interesting than probably their life would be on land. So off they go into the wild blue yonder.
So my understanding of it is, like, during this period of time, obviously it's pivotal in American history, hence, at least part of your interest in writing the book. What is the goal as communicated? Because Captain Cook, like, despite being a great leader of men, and despite being a cartographer and an explorer and a proto-documentarian, he isn't like, yeah, this is what I think we're going to do on this trip. Like, let's go try to do that. Like, he's kind of being instructed by the Royal Navy, like, hey, here's mission objective. What is the purpose of this third voyage?
The main purpose of the voyage is to look for this thing that the British have been obsessed with for generations already, at this point, which is the Northwest Passage. Mm-hmm. Some kind of shortcut over or through Canada that would get you from the Atlantic to the Pacific and then on to China and India, really for trade purposes. That would be a shortcut, so you wouldn't have to go all the way around, Cape. Either the Cape of Good Hope or the Straits of Magellan or whatever, avoiding. This would be one also way to avoid the Spanish and the Portuguese that had control of those southern waters. And so the British had sent ship after ship after ship looking for this thing, and it almost never ended well for them. Scurvy, mutiny, cannibalism, all the classics. Yeah. They up to this point had always been looking for it from the eastern side. In other words, like Greenland, yeah. Norway, up and through those crazy pinched geographies up there. It's insane.
The fjords and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they hadn't found it, but it had been this national obsession of the British that it became almost like, well, we have to find it now because all these people who have lost their lives and suffered, it's meaningless unless we find it now. Like the stakes are that much higher. So why don't we send our best explorer, Captain Cook, to the other side of the world, to the Pacific side, Alaska, as we now call it, a place that was not very well known at all, had been explored by Bering and some of the fur trade interests of Russia, but really the maps were ludicrously wrong, and start looking for that Northwest Passage from the Pacific side. So go from west to east, go from Alaska up and over Canada that way. Supposedly that was going to be the easy way to find it.
Why did they have such a strong sense of conviction that this thing existed in the first place?
Well, there's a lot of literature on that. There had been some early maps that showed some kind of passage, and there's something about maps. Things get on maps early on, and they get enshrined in the public imagination, and they're just like, well, it's got to be there. It's on a map somewhere, like a Mercator map, one of the early ones. That's one thing. There was also this very persistent and obviously completely boneheaded theory that salt water could not freeze. Salt water could not freeze. And so the only reason there's ice up there is discharged fresh water from rivers and streams. And if you could just somehow get out into the open sea away from the coastlines, you could find navigable water. I mean, it's just so wrong. I don't. Salt water freezes. You know, it just does. It takes. I guess it's harder to freeze than fresh water, but it does freeze. So that theory had to be sort of put to rest. Cook's Voyage does kind of go a long way towards proving that it's completely wrong. By the way, that's another one of his negative discoveries, you want to call it. And then there were some weird ass theories about like this symmetrical, like the world is symmetrical, and we found the Straits of Magellan through Magellan found the strait.
Right.
There has to be an equal and opposite strait across across North America. There was all this kind of idea that the planet was symmetrical.
I guess you could probably see it though, just in like how I mean, like the climate is certainly pretty symmetrical, you know. So I think maybe it's just an extension of that.
Yeah.
At least I can see how they'd come to that one, but like, yeah, being like, oh, there's for sure a way to get through this. It's like,
yeah. And the thing is, it seemed like it was every generation had to rediscover how hard this thing was, because, you know, it's like, oh, we know more now. Our tools are a little bit better. It won't be so bad. The ice won't be so bad. I do talk about kind of the architect of this voyage, who's a armchair adventurer guy who was in the Royal Society, and he had interviewed a bunch of Dutch captains, whaling captains, and he said, you know, like, well, they reported that there were whales going north under the ice, and, you know, clearly they must be going to some warm water basin up there or some place where it's open seas, and we saw migratory birds heading north well into the winter. And where are they going except to a balmy, warm place up there? You know, these are anecdotal stories from drunk Dutch captains who are pulling this guy's leg, basically. You know, they don't, you know, it's like, this is not science. And so you add up all this stuff, plus just the national will to do something big. You know, I guess if they had found it, you know, it would it represented huge, you know, millions and millions of dollars of savings in terms of trade with India and China. So the economic stakes were very high. But and of course, the last thing to be said on that subject is, of course, it does exist. I mean, there is a Northwest Passage. There's multiple ways to get across there now. With global warming or climate change, now there are cruise ships going through it and freighters that are going through it. And many times they're not even remotely reinforced for the ice anymore. You know, in the summertime, you can make that trek. So There is a Northwest Passage. It's just there was ice there all the time that really made it not reliable or, you know, not even survivable. So that's the difference.
I do like how they're going, well, you know, going around, you know, the Cape is very, very dangerous. We need to like make this less dangerous. Let's go do something that is historically proven to be very, very dangerous every single time we've tried it.
Right. But do it from the other side. Maybe it won't be so dangerous over there. It's a little crazy. Now, Captain Cook, I don't think he believed in the Northwest Passage. I believe that he just thought this was a part of the world that had not been mapped and charted appropriately. And if we find the Northwest Passage, it's great. But in the meantime, I'm going to do what I love the most, which is taking a huge part of the world. Alaska, I mean, the Alaskan subcontinent it's massive. And in one summer season, 1778, he maps it. And it gives us our first map of Alaska. That's like, you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's Alaska right there. Whereas the prior maps are cartoonishly wrong. I mean, they look like they're jumbles of islands. Alaska is a teeny little island. And, it's wrong. So wrong that Cook believes that those maps were deliberately wrong, to
really?
throw everyone off the scent, that the Russians, were just kind of winking and nodding and trying to, they somewhere in their files, they had more accurate maps somewhere probably. But on the other hand, I mean, Bering was an amazing explorer himself, but he was not a map maker. And he also died during his second expedition. So we never really got the accurate maps that possibly could have come out of his expeditions. Anyway, so that's the main purpose of this third voyage is to leave England, ironically, right as the American Revolution is starting, to go around the world, go up to Alaska, and start mapping it and try to find that Northwest Passage to England.
And part of this had, a kind of, if you find a back door to get to the eastern coast of North America, that at this point in time has a very obvious military advantage. Am I wrong in thinking that they weren't very forthcoming with that? And in fact, they kind of masked the beginning of this trip under the pretense of returning the Polynesian guy.
Yes. Well, so that's the other purpose of the voyage.
Can you tell us about him?
Yeah. So, they didn't advertise that this was an expedition to go to find the Northwest Passage because, the geopolitical significance of that in terms of their relations with France, Spain, and Russia, and a lot of other countries, they just want to keep that a secret. So they said, the purpose of the voyage is to return this Polynesian man named Mai, M-A-I, Mai, who had been living in England and had come there as part of Cook's second voyage, return him there to his home island of Tahiti with all these belongings that he had been accumulating while in England. And Mai is just this fascinating character. He's probably the second most important character in my book. He almost upstages Cook, in my opinion, because he's a lot more fun. He's fun. He's interesting. Ultimately, it's a bittersweet or somewhat tragic story, but he's the first Polynesian to set foot on English soil. He's brought to England, and they immediately roll out the red carpet and make him a celebrity. And, he gets vaccinated for smallpox. He meets the King of England, King George. They parade him around Parliament. And
what does he look like?
He's a stud, man. He's a young, he's in his early 20s. He looks like a warrior, but they think he's a prince. They think he comes from Tahitian royalty, and he does nothing to disabuse them of that. He's actually kind of a nobody who is a refugee living in Tahiti. His father had been murdered in a war against the Bora Boran warriors, and he had really spent the rest of his life, Mai did, trying to sort of figure out how to revenge the death of his father and how to regain the land that had been stolen from by the warriors from Bora Bora. And so when he met the Brits and he got acquainted a little bit with guns and ammunition and cannons, he's like,
I got an idea.
I want that stuff. How do I get that stuff? And he's like, can I come on board your ship and maybe go back to your home island? And he's not saying this, but his thought bubble to himself is guns. And so he does. He gets back to England, and yes, he learns to hunt. he learns all about the sort of the inner workings of rifles or muskets, and and ammunition, and almost to a fault. He gets so good at it. He goes to these estates of these aristocrats, and he doesn't just shoot grouse. He starts shooting like the domesticated fowl as well. It's like, there's a duck, there's a chicken, so anyway, but overall they love him. They treat him like, I mean, it's a little patronizing at times. They kind of poke him and prod him and see if he's
one guy's talking about, maybe I'll keep him as a pet.
Yeah, keep him as a human pet, or the noble savage, they call him, all this kind of stuff. But overall, it's a good experience. But after 2.5 years of living there, he's becoming extremely homesick.
Sure.
He wants to get back to Tahiti. He also secretly wants to get back and start prosecuting. He wants to take out a can of whoop ass with these guns that he's been accumulating.
Full Rambo.
And revenge the death of his father. I didn't mention also he becomes quite friendly with a number of the young ladies. I mean, he's this exotic creature and very handsome. And but he's ready to get back. So King George III says, we're gonna get you back, and Captain Cook is going to be your chauffeur. So he is on board the ship, the Resolution. They sail all the way to Tahiti. They drop him off on a neighboring island with all of these belongings that he has, not just the guns and the ammunition, but also like all kinds of weird things like a jack-in-the-box and this little machine that gives you a shock. It's like a prank kind of toy, a globe of the earth, Bibles, portraits of King George and Queen Charlotte, all kinds of stuff. He's suddenly a rich man, at least in the eyes of his fellow Tahitians, and they don't know what to make of him because he actually comes from a much lower rung of society. So that part of the mission is fulfilled. Cook does leave him on an island. They build him an English house with a lock on it, on the door, so he can keep, all of his belongings and they won't be stolen. And they say goodbye, and Cook is headed towards Alaska now, across the Great Pacific. And in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he stumbles on this incredible archipelago that's not on the charts, Hawaii. It's like, and this is one of the other amazing things about Cook is that, it was like he was attracted to land as if by sort of magnetic attraction. It was like he found this stuff that the Spanish had been going back and forth across the Pacific for hundreds of years, the Manila Galleon phenomenon, and they had never apparently seen this island, these incredible volcanic islands. Cook immediately understands this is a huge find. The Admiralty's going to want to know all about this place, but it's not on his mission. He's like, got to get to Alaska. But he stays for about 2 weeks and just, kind of explores a little bit, does some rudimentary work, and then just says, I got to come back to this place.
I want to circle back to Tahiti for just a second here. What period of time are we like representing from Cook leaving to arriving in Tahiti to drop off Mai?
Well, let's see. They leave in July of 1776 and they get to Tahiti in 1777. So it's a year and a half. It took them to get there. They go through the Indian Ocean. They have to explore. The Admiralty is always giving him extra little side errands. Yeah. And one of those errands is to go to this island group that the French had supposedly discovered. It's way down there, like 2/3 of the way down to Antarctica, and they're called the Kerguelen Islands. And he had to go down there just to find out what was there. Anything the French did, the English had to check it out. They were uninhabited. They were basically, just thousands of penguins. And he decided real quick, we don't need to know about these islands. Let the French have them. They're still part of the French Empire to this day. They're fascinating. I didn't go to them myself, but there's a lot of research and a lot of scientists that go down there and rave about the place. Then the next stop was Tasmania. They spent about a week there. Have the first description of the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. It was actually a very good experience there, I think, in both directions. There was no violence or anything really that happened. Then they go to New Zealand.
There was a less good experience there.
A less good experience there that involves cannibalism. We don't need to go into all the details, but and then they thread through the Cook Islands and
give us a couple details on it because
it's cannibalism.
No, it's more that in these stories of explorers, cannibalism goes one of two ways. It's either something foisted on you or something self-inflicted because you're stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, what's interesting is that when Cook gets to New Zealand, his men don't understand why are we going to New Zealand? It's not really that important. We're behind schedule already. Why are we going back once again to New Zealand? Because he'd been there a good bit, his first and second voyage. And the reason he was going was to investigate an incident that had happened on the second voyage in which 10 of his men had gotten into a fight with the Maori warriors. They had been killed and they had been eaten. And a lot of these cannibal stories are just made up. They're just like
sensationalized.
Sensational. This was for real. It really happened. It was part of the Maori culture. When you get into a fight, to sort of imbibe the spirit of the enemy by eating them. And not only did they admit that this had happened, but they were kind of proud of it. And Cook went back almost in the role of a kind of detective to sort of figure out what happened and to assign blame, perhaps to punish the Maori if he thought they were to blame. And after interviewing everyone he could possibly interview, he decided that his own men had brought this on themselves, that they had started the fight, that this hothead who was kind of a commander of this little detachment of men had gotten into this fight because he was a hothead and he was just, he shoot first and ask questions later. Anyway, they deserved it essentially. Mm-hmm. And the cannibalism part of it, he didn't care about at all because he's like, well, once you're dead, this is what they do. This is their culture. We knew that. They fully acknowledge it. So let's not make a big deal about that. But this outraged Cook's men, though. They were like, we have to revenge the killing of our 10 guys by killing at least 10 of their guys. And Cook was like, no, I'm not going to do that. This happened years ago now.
You don't even know that guy. Yeah. Or maybe you do, but
Right. Well, it's an interesting insight into his personality is that he, is not, I think a lot of English captains would have done just that. They would have gone and slaughtered a bunch of Maori
for sure
for this incident that had happened several years before. And he's like, no, I'm not, I'm going to kind of, this is like Spock.
Yeah.
It's like, that is not reasonable. That is not rational.
Well, I imagine for somebody as practical as him, he's like, dude, it's not worth the effort. I'm not going to instigate a conflict that has the potential to be hugely detrimental to us, both from like a time and energy perspective, but also a personnel perspective to prove some sort of point.
Right. Yeah. And numerically, they would be so numerically disadvantaged if they got into a fight with them that Cook's men would probably all be slaughtered, So the Maori were badass warriors, and they were proud of that, and they were good at that. So Cook moves along and keeps going, and I had one of the problems in my book was I had to deal with the kind of episodic nature of after a while, each time they get to an island, it unfolds it's like Groundhog Day, it's like we go to the island. Do we trade with them? Are they friendly? Do we have sex with these women? Do we resupply the ship? And then we move to the next island, and then it's the same thing,
right?
Kind of a ritual. And so I had to sort of make some strategic decisions to like leave out certain stops along the way, or just gloss over them as they make their way towards Tahiti to deposit Mai and all of his stuff. And a lot of things happen in Tahiti. There's a lot of plot there that I decided to tell.
Well, yeah. And I think one of those, just kind of linking it back to things that get sensationalized in the same way as cannibalism, one of the things that happens in Tahiti is they witness a human sacrifice.
Yeah. I
would like to know more about that, please.
Well, again, another one of these things about Captain Cook is that he had heard rumors of this ritual of human sacrifice, but no one had seen one. No Englishman had seen one. No Frenchman or no European. And he said he wanted the ocular proof.
That is a very Spock-esque way to put that.
And they got invited to go to one.
Who invited them to do this?
Cook and some of his officers, a chief. And this was a human sacrifice to, because they were about to launch a war against a neighboring island. And this was somehow to improve their luck.
How does one, I would love to know like what the circumstances of that invitation are. Like he was like, oh dude, yeah, it's cool as fuck, you should come see this.
It was, the way he describes it, and also the surgeon who was kind of one of the other officers who witnesses this, they're like disgusted from the start, but they are also fascinated to, they're divided, they're conflicted. They don't want to do anything to sort of encourage this, but since it's already happening,
I feel like they've been invited to a bullfight or something, where it's just like some people are going to have real hard feelings about it, and some people will be like, I totally want to see that.
Yeah, and this is where Cook is wearing his other hat. He's not really, he's not a captain anymore. He's not a map maker anymore. He's an anthropologist, and he's like, I'm not here to judge these people. I'm here to document how they live their life and how they practice their religion. And he was gratified to learn that they would not be witnessing the death of the poor guy. He had already been killed. They brought in a dead guy, freshly killed somewhere else. Yeah. And then there was this elaborate ritual with the priests, and they bring the body up into a kind of a scaffolding area, and they sort of ritualistically partake of its flesh, but they don't actually eat it. It was weird, and Cook is trying to document what's happening. He doesn't understand, of course, half of it. And there was an artist an expedition artist who does a series of drawings that become engravings. And what's really important about this description of this human sacrifice is what happens later when they get back and these things get published. And that is the missionaries in England are appalled by this behavior, and they immediately launch these missionary societies to go to Tahiti to stamp out these diabolical acts of human sacrifice, which leads to major changes in society of Polynesia. So it had long-term consequences, just this witnessing of this one human sacrifice.
How does Cook describe this?
Oh, he does, I say he's like an anthropologist, but at the same time, his disgust for it comes through loud and clear. And in fact, he tells the chief afterwards, the chief says, what do you think? What do you think? And he's like, I think it's horrible. I think it's disgusting. And I think that it will not help your chances in winning the war that you're trying to fight. perhaps quite the opposite.
Which is still a very level like assessment of like this kind of thing. I mean,
and the chief is disgusted with Cook, and he's like, I can't believe you say these things. Your culture is terrible. Like, can't believe you don't have human sacrifices back where you come from. It's
speaking of wars, you're about to lose one because you didn't do any human sacrifices.
Yeah, it's pretty funny actually, the difference of opinions there. And in fact, the next stop Cook makes is to the island that was going to be fighting the war against. And, so he kind of wants to check out this island to see if they do human sacrifices. And he did not see one there, but that's an island called Moorea, where some other intense things go on though, which I don't know if you want to go into that, but he's just going from island to island to island. And it seems like everywhere he goes, something pretty dramatic happens.
What happens? And this is in close proximity to Tahiti. This is within French Polynesia here. Yeah.
Well, so, on Cook's third voyage, something was different with Captain Cook. He wasn't exactly the same guy. People started noticing it early on in the voyage. Like his temper was rising. He was using the lash on his own men more and more often, like
when he had that near miss right out of the gate too.
Yeah. He made some weird judgment calls. He took some weird risks that didn't seem like the old guy.
Yeah.
He was more violent with the indigenous people that he encountered for various things. He was alone in his cabin a lot. Just, no one seemed to know where they were going, or he was he was not communicative. He was not collaborative in the way he had been in voyages 1 and 2. And scholars and even like forensic, like medical people have pored over the evidence and tried to determine what was wrong with him medically. Like maybe there was something wrong, and I
feel like it's always syphilis.
No, syphilis is certainly on the list because some of this behavior I've described is common with like advanced syphilis. But the leading theory is that he had a parasite, that he ate a lot of weird food, and was one of the great things about Cook is that he ate anything that was put in front of him by any of these Polynesian or other countries. He thought it was rude not to partake, and he ate a lot of weird stuff, and he probably got a parasite or multiple parasites, which prevented the absorption of basic vitamins and minerals, which can lead to brain damage. I mean, that's not actually an esoteric point. And we know it happens. I mean, we've seen what happened with RFK Jr. Parasites,
brainworms
lead to problems. So I don't personally weigh in on the subject. I'm not a doctor. I don't really know, but that seems like a reasonable thing. But these behavior traits that we see in Cook really come to a head in a profound way on the island of Moorea. When he gets to Moorea, he has, among other things, I didn't even mention that there's a lot of animals on board his ship. Lots of animals. It's almost like Noah's Ark, because the King of England wanted Cook to share common English barnyard animals with all of Polynesia. So there's this goat, and it happens to be a pregnant goat, and it gets stolen on the island of Moorea by someone who's just curious about what this creature is. They'd never seen a goat before. They'd never seen horses. They'd never seen a lot of these animals that are on board the ship. Instead of like carefully, quietly, systematically negotiating for the return of the goat in the way that Cook probably would have done on voyages 1 or 2, he just loses it. And he makes all these threats. He's going to kill the king or the chiefs, or kidnap them, or he's going to do this, he's going to do that. But then he just decides to go on a basically a scorched earth campaign across the entire island, and says he's going to continue until the goat is returned. So every hut, every canoe destroyed, burned. He doesn't kill anybody. He doesn't torture anybody or injure anyone that I'm aware of, but he does lead this campaign across the island. Just, a canoe, for example, is like, the most important possession that a Polynesian had. It was his source of livelihood. It was a sort of source of identity. These were beautiful canoes that took, months and years to carve. So he's destroying all this. And his men are going like, what is wrong with the captain? Like, this is just a goat, we'll probably get the goat back. And even if we don't, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And they're just saying, we've made enemies for life of these people. Now they don't, this is not the old Captain Cook. And these behavioral traits, it's more episodic. It's not like he's always this way, but it kind of ebbs and flows, and it surges and at various times and in various places. But when he gets to Hawaii, at the end of the narrative, we see kind of a repeat of Moorea, and it leads ultimately, to his death. So there is a kind of a foreshadowing aspect to what happens there.
This like crazy, uncharacteristic display of force.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing happens. Now they're kind of like, okay, we dropped off my time to get on with like the more clandestine mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is this Northwest Passage. And that's on the other side of the planet, by the way. We're not like, oh, we'll go check that out now. Yeah, 9,000 miles away, something like that at this point. So yeah, long way to go.
What is their voyage like to where they will be scouting for the Northwest Passage?
Well, they didn't think they would find anything. They were expecting essentially to be crossing the Pacific and not see anything until they made landfall in North America. But they stumble upon Hawaii, and specifically the island of Kauai, mm-hmm. and make landfall there. And it's just mind-blowing. It's just like there's this thriving civilization in the middle of the Pacific, and they're not on the maps. They're not on any charts. And furthermore, they're speaking the same language. Cook, by this point, really had picked up a lot of Polynesian language, realizing it is the same, there's different dialects, but it's the same language, whether you're in New Zealand, Tonga, Easter Island, Tahiti, or now Hawaii. He's realizing these people have really, they must have been, world-class navigators, and it wasn't an accident that they got to these places. They clearly made multiple trips. They brought animals with them. They brought the same language and culture with them. And so he's really the first explorer to begin to piece together this whole question of like the Polynesian diaspora, it's called, just like how did they do it? How did they build canoes that could withstand the ocean distances that they're traveling?
Did he draw any useful conclusions?
Well, he certainly was fascinated by their ship architecture, by their understanding of currents and migratory patterns of birds, and and stars. They were in their own way very, very good astronomers, and so yeah, he draws a lot of the big sort of rudimentary beginning conclusions that have led to what we kind of understand today. But it does say something, I think, about him that, it's like he's the first explorer to have been to all these places, and he realizes they're the same, that this is the same culture. It's extraordinary to him. He just, it's just mind blowing. But he also begins to wonder, why did the migration stop? at some point they stopped. They didn't, they lost contact with Tahiti, let's say, was kind of that area was the place from which all these other expeditions originated. It's like almost as an interesting question of, how did they do it why did they stop and lose contact with that culture?
Okay, so he's making these observations about these folks that are now inhabiting Hawaii, and what's his next move here?
Well, I think part of him, like the old explorer, would like to have stayed for weeks and months and just explored Hawaii, because he knew the Admiralty was going to know all about this place.
Unbelievably lush
and large population, and quite sophisticated in terms of their agriculture and irrigation systems, and very rich sort of pageants of their religious rituals were very complicated but familiar to him. They're very Polynesian, but had their own nuances and twists. And he wanted to stay, but he's looking at the clock and the calendar, and he's like, I got to get to Alaska. They didn't really call it that then, but
sure.
So after a week, he shoves off. A little more than a week.
What time of year is this?
Well, it is the spring of 1778.
So he's kind of nailing it as far as timelines go.
Yeah, now he's got to get up to Alaska, in time for when the ice begins to melt, and we can start exploring in earnest. But so he leaves, and I think even then he's going, I'm gonna circle back to this place. Make mental note. I'm gonna put it here, and we're gonna come back. So he goes across the Pacific and makes landfall off the coast of Oregon, and starts working his way up the coast. He encounters some hellacious storms. He has to stop in a place called Nootka Sound, which is Vancouver Island, and has to spend a month repairing his ships. And I mean, that is one of the things that about these voyages that, it's like, you have to remember that we're talking about kind of like floating construction projects. I mean, they're just constantly needing to be rebuilt. Masts are rotting. They have to, the carpenters who are rebuilding the ship as it goes, they're constantly hunting for good wood to rebuild. So they keep working their way up the coast of what we call now Vancouver Island. The young George Vancouver is a midshipman on this voyage, by the way, learning from Cook. He will then go on later to become one of the great, one of the other great explorers of British history. They make their way up to Alaska. And at a certain point, every time they see a river or a bay or an inlet of any kind. Is
that the Northwest Passage?
Yeah, they got to duck in there and check that out. And it isn't the Northwest Passage. It's always something else. And he's mapping it, but it's this kind of goose chase at this point that he's he has to check out each one, but he also has to look at the clock, look at the calendar, look at the season, and think, I've got to keep going. And because the ice is going to reappear along about September or so. So I think it's one of the great accomplishments of his career is what he does in Alaska, because you see the old Cook just thriving. He just loves what he's doing. He's working on this huge canvas, this big scale, and he's on the fly mapping in really very rough sea conditions, very rough weather conditions, the entire coastline of Alaska. He gets through the Aleutian Islands, and then he keeps going up the west coast of Alaska. He goes through the Bering Strait while briefly making a stop in Asia. Just wanted to do that, kind of like tag you're in. Yeah. And then it goes through what we call the Bering Strait, up and over Alaska, and then works his way eastward about as far as present-day Barrow, Alaska, which is really far.
Yeah.
And then he encounters, an impenetrable, massive wall of ice. And he's like, nope. It's not
game over.
Not going to happen this season. Not going to be sailing to England. And furthermore, it's in danger of enveloping his ship and destroying his ship. And he has to make some very tricky maneuvers to get out of that. But he decides to follow the coastline, the line of the ice, all the way as far west as he can go, back towards Asia again. And for about a week, he's following the ice, thinking maybe there's a way through the ice somehow or another. But he's not. This is one of the great things about Cook as well. He's not foolhardy. There have been plenty of explorers who've said, well, let's go deep into this inlet of ice. Maybe it goes through, and
he's not going to throw good money after bad.
Yeah. And then they get crushed, and then they die, and then you never hear from them again. Yeah. He's not going to be that guy. So then he's like, all right, well, most captains at this point would have said, well, we didn't find it. It's not there. It's not reliable. It's covered in ice. We're not going to be heroes on this trip. Chalk it up to another negative discovery. Like, we found that it's really not possible. Yeah. Most captains would have sailed home, which would have taken another year at least to get home.
How long did it take him to get from Hawaii to Alaska?
I think, let's see, about 4 months. Okay. What he decides to do is he says, well, maybe this ice is just an aberration of this season. Maybe if I come back next summer, it won't be there. So I'll give it one more, try. It was a stiff upper lip British, determination. Mm-hmm. So why don't we plan on coming back? And his men are like, oh God, really? We're going to come back up here one more time, risk our lives again. But he says, yes, but the good news is we're going to spend the winter in a warm place. We're going to go back to that amazing place, Hawaii, and explore that some. And it's not like it's close. I mean, again, it's like, what, 4,000 or 5,000 miles down to Hawaii. But that's what he decides to do. And in retrospect, we know, that he shouldn't have done that. That decision led to his death.
What had his previous experience in Hawaii been like, aside from being impressed with the vegetation and the scale and the civilization? Mm-hmm. Had he had a really positive experience prior?
Yeah, I mean, they were treated very well. They ate very well. They traded. I think he thought equally. He was ready for more, and plus the Kauai people on Kauai said, we're not the only island. There's like all these other amazing islands to the east of us. So he was really very curious, like, what are these other islands? And when he works his way back to Hawaii, instead of going to Kauai, he sees the Big Island with its massive volcano with snow on top, and he's like, I'm going there. That's like the, forget Kauai. This is even more impressive. And so he goes all the way around the Big Island in a clockwise fashion, with the land always at his right.
This is 79.
Now we are in 78, but and then it crosses over into 79. And he does this weird thing. He does not come ashore. He lets the Hawaiians come to him in their canoes. But he does this partly because he doesn't want his men to communicate syphilis and gonorrhea, to the Hawaiians, which is something that had happened already on Kauai. Mm. He's very concerned about this venereal disease thing. He writes about it a lot. It's like, and he actually makes a surgeon.
It sounds like something somebody with syphilis would do.
Maybe you think he had syphilis. That's an interesting.
No, I think everybody has syphilis, man. Back then, anyhow, not now.
Yeah. But it brings up this kind of horrible optic that you don't want to think about. But the surgeon would, at Cook's orders, would go and check out the genitals, of every man, line them up, drop trowel. And if you have any signs of venereal disease, you have to stay aboard. And and if you're clean, you can go ashore. And so he's checking out all this stuff. I just don't want to think about it, but that's what he did. And these poor guys that were like really close to paradise couldn't go ashore because they had VD. Of course, none of them were going. If like the first part of this, he's, like I say, circumnavigating the island and not letting anyone go ashore. They aren't anchoring. They're just carrying on trade by canoe, and he's charting the Big Island, and producing what ultimately was a great map of the Big Island. Finally, though, they get buffeted by enough storms, and they're just, the men are just going crazy. They're just like, look, there's paradise right there. Can't we go ashore? Plus, there's probably beautiful Polynesian women. They're probably thinking all the things that sailors back then thought. So they finally get around to the Kona coast of the Big Island and duck into this picturesque bay called Kealakekua Bay. Beautiful, beautiful place. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people there because it is the height of this religious festival called the Makihiki. And there are canoes by the thousands in the bay. There's a temple there dedicated to the god Lono. And they start calling Cook Lono. They seem to think perhaps he is the god Lono returning according to the old myths. And they bow down to him, and they,
he just showed up at a really good point in time,
Yes, and in the way the rituals, the way the stories went was that Lono would return in these two giant canoes with huge sails and in a clockwise fashion, and that he would arrive in that bay at that temple at the height of that festival. And it was like all of this stuff transpired exactly according to the myths. And it's almost, you can't believe it, the serendipity of it. They seem to have thought, at least, and this has been debated a lot by anthropologists, and I go into the various debates, but at least for a short time, they seem to have thought he was the returning god, and it certainly treated him like he was and called him Lono. And he doesn't really do anything to
dissuade that idea.
He's like, well, if they think I'm a god, maybe they'll treat us better. So, and he meets the priest, and then ultimately he meets the king of Hawaii. Everything basically goes pretty well. He and his men kind of overstay their welcome after a number of weeks. But one of the things, Cook's always been pretty good about sensing when he's overstaying his welcome. And he can tell it's time to go. So loads up the ships and they head out, and they're going to go thread through some of the other islands, go to Oahu, go to Maui, but they encounter a gale 3 days out, and it snaps his foremast of his ship, the Resolution, and he has to turn around and go. He decides to go right back to the same bay to repair his ship. And they're like, "What are you doing here? What?
We thought you left, man.
The Makihiki is over now. The season is over. Now it's the time of war and politics. What are you doing? Well, you're a god out of season, right? You're the calendar doesn't work this way. And furthermore, if you were a god, you could fix your own ship. I mean, you don't need,
Oh man!
So they if they ever thought he was the god, they certainly didn't anymore, and they treated him completely differently now. As his carpenters come ashore to try to chop down a tree and fix the Resolution, all these things get stolen from including a rowboat that is really an important one that's anchored next to the Resolution. So this is where that old Cook of Moorea reemerges. He, in order to get the rowboat back, he probably should have gotten his officers to come ashore and,
we'll leave, just give us the boat and
do some negotiating and give some gifts. And instead, he himself marches ashore and wakes up the king of Hawaii from his slumber and kind of drags him towards the boats and what he was trying to do is kidnap him and get him on the Resolution. And they wasn't going to harm him, but basically we'll keep him until you give us the rowboat back. But this is the king of Hawaii. He's a god. He is not just some low chief. This is the king. And Kalani Opu'u is his name, and he's a kind of a badass, and he's got 1,000 bodyguards, and things get out of hand very quickly. I don't necessarily like to give away all the details of what transpires after that, other than it escalates in a hurry. There's some serious miscues and miscommunications, and I know that most people know, if they know anything about Captain Cook, is that he dies a horrible, violent death on the lava flats there, and it is something. It's something that's been the subject of poems and operas and plays and paintings.
What I'll have is we either got to give away some events or some gory details, man. It's got to be one or the other.
Well, I'll say one thing. So one of the things that Cook's blacksmiths on his ships have been giving away as gifts is these rudimentary kind of knives that they're like shivs, almost like prison shivs or something, as gifts, to the Hawaiians, like hundreds and hundreds of them. And probably the weapon that killed him, he was attacked by so many people we don't really know, but were these knives that the Brits had given them, because they were so fascinated with metal and with iron. So, note to future explorers, don't give people you don't know well, a knife as a gift, as a personal gift.
If we get to Mars and there are aliens, don't give them laser beam. Don't give them laser blasters.
Yeah, or the Star Wars things.
Lightsabers.
Yeah, lightsabers. No, don't do it. So there's that detail. I will say that what made it even more spectacular and spectacularly violent for the Brits was that most of them were on their ships watching through their field glasses. It was just too far away for them to intervene in any way. They could see this unfold like a play almost against the backdrop of these huge cliffs. And they're watching their commander just get hacked and bashed to pieces, and literally his brains are bashed in. And then they drag his corpse up into the hills. They cook him. They dismember him. Yeah, his bones are spread all over the island. And Cook's men then come ashore to try to negotiate the return of some of his body parts. And it gets pretty gross after that. And they do get a few things back and have a burial at sea. But and of course, the question comes up, was he eaten? And most likely he was not. That was something very much that the Maori did and some other Polynesian cultures, but did not seem to be a thing in Hawaii. But Cook's men still believed it, that he had been, literally cooked. And I did think about maybe having some recipes in the back,
oh my gosh.
What the hell? Why not? But
oh man, well, I'll tell you what, if there were recipes like what Captain Cook ate in life, you would have a lot of just saltless boiled Captain.
Yeah, they ate really strange and unusual things on the voyages, but they also ate some weird things just in their galley, typical stuff in the galley. Often things that they thought that would somehow prevent scurvy, but they were just like, what were you thinking? I don't know. Fermented this and fermented that, Yeah, I mean, I did think you could have kind of a companion cookbook, so to speak, that just like all the weird food that these explorers ate along on these journeys.
I certainly think it would be interesting to. Well, I mean, it's like kind of the original like travel blogger, in a certain way, right? And it is, I do love how kind of out of character, like that dude's fascination with, or willingness to try a lot of new foods, like was, and like that's not really like any profound point in this conversation, but it is something that's like kind of charming in a particular way. I don't really know how to interact with it.
He's just like, this is a new culture. This is what they eat. I want to explore it. I want to, I want to know what these people are like. And he would sit down with anyone. And he also had this kind of amazingly, you might say it was reckless, not almost naive, willingness to sort of come ashore, often always unarmed and often unaccompanied, and sort of be the first one to touch the beach and sort of raise up his arms and say, I come in peace, and look him in the eye. And, if I just do that,
things tend to happen good.
It'll be good. And sort of I called it kind of like a dance of first contact, like this is the way you do it. And if you do it this way, nothing bad will happen to you. And it worked for him for dozens and dozens and dozens of encounters on so many islands across the Pacific. And it could have easily not have worked. I just think he had luck on his side often, good karma, something. Finally, one day it didn't work. And he marched ashore with temper and just a fury, and the body language was all wrong.
When you try to kidnap somebody's king, they tend to get pissed, unless, of course, they don't.
Right. So I guess you could ask the question. Yes, it was shocking that he was killed in this manner, but it was even maybe more amazing that it hadn't already happened somewhere along the line from all these other encounters that he had.
I would have expected the Maoris to harbor some more hard feelings than they did. Okay, so what happens? Captain Cook is now Captain Cooked. What happens after to the rest of the crew? Because they're watching this go down from like the ships. They negotiate for the body. They get some of the parts. They presumably have this, burial at sea. Now what?
Yeah. So we have a new captain now. The number 2 has become the number 1. Captain Cook's good friend. Captain, and this is kind of confusing. His name is Captain Clark. So you go from Cook to Clark, and he becomes the commander of the expedition. He decides to honor Cook's wish, which is to go back to Alaska. And look for that Northwest Passage one last time, even though he believes it's quixotic. Not only that, he thinks it's going to kill him because Clark has tuberculosis. And the worst thing for someone with advanced tuberculosis to go up into cold, wet weather. And, but he leads the ships back, and they go all the way back to Alaska.
Is this what people like referred to in the old days as having a touch of like consumption?
Consumption, yeah. It was one of the most common illnesses that killed a lot of people, including the surgeon on the ship also has it, and he dies of it.
And Captain Clark.
So Captain Clark, I mean, he's honoring Cook's wishes, but he's doing it almost against his own personal better judgment. He's like, we're risking a lot to go back to this place. I bet you it's just going to be the same thing. And it was exactly the same thing. It was a nearly impenetrable wall of ice, almost in exactly the same place. And, again, kind of proving that, it's like, it's just not something that is going to happen, at least not in our lifetime. They couldn't foresee climate change. Then Captain Clark dies of finally consumption, takes his life, and he's buried in Kamchatka, Russia.
Oh, really?
Now we have a third captain, Captain John Gore, this Virginian American-born guy who is a veteran explorer himself, and he takes the ships home, which is, it's a year in the making. I mean, they go, down the eastern coast of Japan. They stop in places like Iwo Jima. They see volcanoes, and go through Indonesia and Vietnam, just all threading through all these islands. Then they end up going around to the Cape of Good Hope, Cape Town, South Africa, and finally work their way to England. And when John Gore gets home, the American Revolution is nearly over, and he has to make a decision: am I American or am I British? Under whose flag I've been flying for the last 4 years. He decides he's British, and sticks with the Navy, but they have to explain what happened to Captain Cook and also Captain Clark, England was in mourning. I mean, they viewed Captain Cook. They didn't call him Lono. But they almost deified him. As a great martyr to exploration and a great kind of
source of national pride.
National pride, almost a foundational figure. Certainly the greatest explorer they had ever produced. And they had to start producing the books, the volume, the 3-volume, what became the 3-volume best-selling account of the voyage. He became this, he became a god in a way. And one of the things that they did from then on is they started producing a lot of, this is something the British are really good at, is producing statues, of Cook all over the place. When Australia became a penal colony and then became a country, they erected a lot of statues to Cook. Same with New Zealand. Same with Vancouver Island and other places in Canada. And, as I was researching and writing the book, Cook was more and more in the news. He was his statues, some of these statues that were being ripped down or vandalized. And, indigenous people all over the Pacific just don't like Cook. It's not so much who he was or what he did. It's really what came after Cook, what his voyages put on the map that led to all these other developments in his wake. Here come the armies and the navies and the alcohol and the germs and the whalers, the sealers, the missionaries. And, I think in many ways it's unfair to single him out. He's not, in some ways he's like the messenger of modernity. Not, he's not really, he didn't conquer anybody. He didn't, leave any of his men behind to colonize any of these places. He was mainly interested in sort of describing these places and documenting them. But on the other hand, exploration is the first phase of colonial conquest. You got to find the place, then later comes all the rest.
Well, and there are certain harbingers that it's like, yeah, well, this thing is like pretty innocuous on its own. It's like, if you have a neighborhood in like North Philadelphia, like Fishtown, and all of a sudden, like where it's been a lot of just working class folks, all the artists start coming in. It's like, well, I don't hate the artists, but I know what comes next. Then you have the coffee shops. Then you have like the music venues. Then you have like the shops. Then you have the rich folks. And now it's not the neighborhood anymore. Now it's like,
no one can afford to live there unless they trust fund people or something like that, right? The gentrification or whatever. Yeah. And so it's much easier in criticizing that phenomenon to find a symbol or an emblem of it, a statue of one guy, than rather somehow critique the entire process. So that's why the statues come down. I think it's also because those statues, almost all of them have a military aspect to them. Like they don't show them sitting down making a map.
Right.
They show them like strutting or striding or, standing like, practically thrusting his hips, like in a military posture. And it just looks like it could be any bewigged tricorn hat wearing, Brit
Looks
general.
like someone who's come to conquer.
Right. And that really is not the spirit with which he, and I would say uniquely, was not what he was about. So I do think they kind of picked the wrong guy in that sense, but at the same time, I understand why there weren't a whole lot of statues to a whole lot of other people. I mean, he became sort of stand-in for this whole process.
How would you compare him to somebody like, now widely maligned, like Columbus?
Mm-hmm. I think he's often thrown into that same category nowadays unfairly, because Columbus really was a colonist. Columbus really was someone who slaughtered people, huge numbers of on the island of Hispaniola. The numbers are terrifying. Just the people who were just slaughtered. And he profited, from his explorations in a major way. I don't think it's fair to compare him to Columbus, but people do try to do that. I think maybe a better comparison to think about is Magellan, whose voyage around the world was the first circumnavigation of the world, as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't make it home. The Voyage made it home, but he didn't. He, like Cook, was killed on the shore of an island in the Pacific. And Cook really admired Magellan. Cook said, basically, this guy did these extraordinary things with the very crude tools that he had to work with. He didn't have the marine chronometer, for example. Magellan didn't. And yet he accomplished all these things. But Cook said, one thing I'm not going to do is get involved in the political infighting of these various islands. And I'm not going to try to, as Magellan did, convert people to Christianity. I'm just going to sort of be this aloof scientist guy, and I'm going to, document. And yet, tragically, Cook dies in almost the exact same manner, and he does get involved in the end in a dispute, and dies a very similar death to Magellan. It's very interesting in that way.
Are there any of those criticisms of Cook that you think are valid? I'm sure there are some to varying degree, but is there one thing that you're like, yeah, that dude did fuck that up pretty good?
Yeah. The whole question of what was wrong with Cook on the third voyage and various times when his temper erupts. Yes, like Moorea is one place. Some other islands where little objects were stolen, and he would do things like cut off the ear of a thief, or threaten to do that. Some kind of cruelty, some torture scenarios that just you didn't see on Voyage 1 and 2. It's like he was losing it. And, this exploration business was weighing on him now. I mean, he was just, it turned him into a different person. And I do think there are many individual sort of episodic incidents like that do occur, that you can criticize. But again, for his times, comparing him to other captains of his day, he was unbelievably, unusually sympathetic to the people he encountered, and genuinely enthralled by most of the people that he met. So I just often think they get the wrong guy when they single him out, and put him in the same category as someone like Columbus.
He was certainly a better navigator than Columbus.
Better navigator, a better map maker, really a better captain, better in every category. He just, and he discovered multiple new places that, like Columbus kind of discovered one place.
Right.
And yet we celebrate, of course, it's Indigenous Peoples Day, but I guess it's also being called Columbus Day simultaneously. So yeah, I think it's a complicated subject. This thing of exploration, it's so deeply embedded in like human nature and what we do and how we operate. And yet it often gets us into trouble.
Yeah, well, it is one of those like nuanced things, and I think that like it's like F. Scott Fitzgerald that said, like it's a paraphrase, like the mark of intelligence is to be able to hold two contrasting ideas in your head and not lose your shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, the book, I'm a fan of your books, man. Particularly the Kingdom of Ice, which we are going to talk about. Okay, well, what do you hope people get out of this book? Somebody's never read Hampton Sides before. What's your hope for them here?
Well, on one level, I don't mind saying that it should be entertaining. It should be. You should want to. If you read it, I think you'll turn pages. You'll learn a lot about that world. It's sort of escapist literature in some senses. Like if you're tired of what's going on in the news today and you're just burnt out by the headlines, jump into a time machine and go back to 1776 with me, and you will be entertained and enthralled, I think, by what you read. It also, I think, it's a story that sheds a lot of light on how we got to where we are today as a global economy. It kind of participates in a lot of these kind of debates that are going on in the culture now, and it's certainly at universities. Questions about cultural appropriation and patriarchy and all these buzzwords that you hear. This story has all that stuff. It's like debatable, big themes like that. Invasive species, toxic masculinity, all these kind of buzzwords, which we talk about in certainly at universities these days, are all deeply embedded in this story. And I guess finally, just I do think that I think when I've been on book tours for this book, I found that most Americans don't know who Cook was. They actually more often than not thought he was a pirate, Captain Hook. Oh. Yeah, you're writing a book about Captain Hook. The guy with the parrot on his shoulder,
the alligator with the clog.
And I was like, no. This is whatever you want to think about him. Ultimately, and certainly whatever you want to think about the enterprise of colonialism and imperial discovery. He belongs in the pantheon of the greatest explorers of all time. I'm sorry, by any metric you can think of. And people in England certainly know who he is, and Australia, New Zealand, but Americans didn't. And so I love the fact that this book, which has done much better than I ever imagined it would, has acquainted a whole new sort of generation of Americans to this pretty amazing explorer who went around the world 3 times and kind of gave us the modern world.
Can I tell you something that I love about your writing?
Always.
Well, and this is like true of like a lot of the writers that I really like to read and admire. And John Valen and Lori Gwen Shapiro being 2 of them. It's this way to convey information. Well, it does what good narrative nonfiction does, right? It conveys complex, information dense events in human history in these engaging, concise, and vivid ways. I mean, and it does what I think great literature does and great poetry does or great art does, is it takes something complex and it makes it digestible and accessible. And, in that way, it really is a pleasure to read. the wide, wide sea out everywhere now?
Out everywhere now. I mean, pleasure is the word that I'm shooting for. I want it to be a great experience. You know, I think most historians, or at least academic historians, aren't supposed to admit that. You know, like it's not supposed to be pleasurable.
Yeah. Oh, you mean reading? People read for joy?
Yeah. And so it's very pleasurable for me to hear you use that word. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you about any of my books, but particularly in The Kingdom of Ice, which is another one of these amazing survival exploration tales of woe. And hopefully you found it pleasurable as well.
Well, I gotta admit, I really loved that book. All right. Well, hey, look, that's it for this week on the Backcountry Manifesto. Hampton Sides, part 2. This is coming up where we are going to talk about In the Kingdom of Ice. Thank you for being on this week. I will see you in 3 minutes and also next week.
All right, man. Really enjoyed it.
Like night passes in cupola looking at the stars definitely gave me that sense that you're just this tiny human whipping around the planet.
Did you ever think to yourself, like, did you expect to feel that way? Or, was it like yeah, man, like that's kind of the way that people like describe it. And then you find yourself being there and be like, oh, that's because that's how it really is. Yeah,
the latter. Yeah. I didn't really know. People say like seeing the Earth from space is a life-changing experience. So you kind of know that and you're anticipating that. But seeing it is still different. Like seeing it in real person is still different and personal. And I also think seeing it day after day, like for 6 months, getting to know these spots on Earth that we fly over on a regular basis was also like an interesting part of it that I didn't expect. Like I knew like seeing Earth was going to blow my mind and be very memorable, but like the day after day of like looking down and getting really familiar with the planet in such a way like you could just look out the window and like based on the pattern of agriculture be like, oh, that's South America. Like, oh, that's just because that's like the pattern of the fields. Like I know that, like these places like you've never been, but you're suddenly so familiar with them.